Okay, well, welcome to the next class in Science and Prophecy in the Bible. We're going to be talking about paleontology today. This is probably one of my favorite sections of our class, talking about dinosaurs or just the study of ancient animals and how they reveal a young Earth. There's a lot of misconceptions about dinosaurs and when they lived and that kind of thing. So we'll be talking about that in this class and just how long ago were they and did man actually live with dinosaurs? And actually, you're going to see there's a whole lot of evidence that they did. But let's get started. The word dinosaur is come from the Greek dinos, which means inspiring dread or awe, and then sauros, which means lizard or your dreaded lizard. So very descriptive name there. So some of the main points we'll be talking about that dinosaurs were not really discovered or excavated and reconstructed until the 19th century. Before that, they were really kind of unknown other than through legends. In the late 19th century, we had the means and the technologies and things to reconstruct the bones that we find, and of course, in modern times, we're used to seeing these creatures reconstructed in museums and that kind of thing. But before that, no one knew what these things were, and they really were just buried bones that were discovered every now and then, but were not really understood. But the Bible has many references to dinosaurs. There are specific descriptions of the behemoth and leviathan there in Job 40 and 41. There's many other scriptures that describe dragons, and that's really what these animals were called before the term dinosaurs was coined. The term was dragons. And many different cultures all over the world have artwork and many other evidences of man living with dinosaurs. And a little known facts are that the soft organic structures and even DNA of dinosaurs have been recovered from the fossil record. And that's kind of not been shown very evidently in the news articles and things very much because that doesn't really fit the narrative of evolution. Because how could these soft cellular structures and even DNA, how could that last for 65 million years when they supposedly all died out? But as you'll see, there's no evidence that it was that long ago when these animals lived that they were lived very recently. So formal history states that dinosaurs are unknown until fairly recently, just like I mentioned. There's legends of these great beasts, these dinosaurs, these dragons, that go back thousands of years. They were not discovered or reconstructed till the 19th century. So as I mentioned, how could man have knowledge of dinosaurs pre-19th century if they died out 65 million years ago? So what is a fossil? Fossils are just a record of life preserved in rock. That's in its simplest terms. And fossils are formed in a number of different ways, but mostly when there's two particular ways: petrification and casting. These happen generally when some animal or plant life gets buried in water and mud and that kind of thing, and very buried very quickly. And these two processes happen. Petrification, these soft tissues quickly decompose, leaving the hard bones or shells behind. And then over time, the sediment builds over the top and hardens into rock, and then these encased bones decay. And as the mineral seeps in, replacing the organic material cell by cell. So you kind of have the bone structure and that kind of thing, cartilage and all that being replaced by this silt or minerals that seep in and basically have a statue of the creature or the plant. In casting is a little different, where again the animal or plant is buried very quickly and decays, leaving a cast of the organism, and the void left behind may then fill in with minerals, making a stone replica of the organism. And of course, fossils were once considered to be composed completely of rock minerals. Recent discoveries reveal that many fossils, supposedly millions of years old, contain soft tissue. Of course, this is baffling to evolutionists, but completely in line with a young Earth viewpoint. When we consider the Bible and paleontology, we see this word tannin, and it's translated at least 22 times there in the Old Testament. Normally, it's translated as dragon. Uh, Tannin means a marine or land monster. There in the fifth day of creation, we can read about it in Genesis chapter 1. A lot of times it uses the word whale, but that same tannin word tannin is just another word for dragon. It's the same actual word. And you see that word dragon used in a number of verses that I'm showing there, everything from Nehemiah to the Psalms to Isaiah, Jeremiah, Micah, and Malachi. They're all mentioning dinosaurs. And just kind of a timeline there and graphically displayed. You have the flood there in around 2350 BC or thereabouts. Job was written just a few hundred years after that, around 2000 BC. And of course, in Job is where it mentions the behemoth and the Leviathan. The Psalm, written around 1000 BC, David mentions a Leviathan or dragon there. Isaiah talks about a fiery flying serpent. Interesting story of Daniel, in Daniel, Bel and the dragon. That's in the Apocrypha version of Daniel, but still it's a dragon story nonetheless. And then you keep going into the more present times in St. George in 300 AD, Beowulf in 600 AD, uh, Peruvian pottery with dragons on it in 1100 to 1400 BC or AD, I should say. And then even all the way up into 1890, we'll look at a news article that was posted of the tombstone epitaph of a pterodactyl, it seems. So all throughout history, we've seen these legends and stories of dragons. This Daniel 14 is very interesting. Like I mentioned, this is not in the canonized scripture that is typically looked at by Protestant Christians, but it is an apocrypha that's a lot of times used by the Catholics and others. But let's just read this story here in Daniel 14. Chapters 13 and 14 of Daniel are not in the Protestant canonized scriptures, but it is in the apocrypha, like I mentioned. But Daniel 14 says, Now in that place there was a great dragon, which the Babylonians revered. And the king said to Daniel, You cannot deny that this is a living God, so worship him. Daniel said, I worship the Lord my God, for he is the living God. But give me permission, O king, and I will kill the dragon without sword or club. And the king said, I give you permission. Then Daniel took pitch, fat, and hair, and boiled them together and made cakes, which he fed to the dragon. The dragon ate them and burst open. Then Daniel said, See what you have been worshiping. And when the Babylonians heard about it, they were very indignant and conspired against the king, saying, The king has become a Jew. He has destroyed Bel and killed the dragon and slaughtered the priests. Going to the king, they said, Hand Daniel over to us, or else we will kill you and your household. And the king saw that they were pressing him hard, and under compulsion, he handed Daniel over to them. And then right after this story, there is when Daniel, it talks about the lion's den that he's cast into. So we can see that there's definitely dragons mentioned here. Again, it's not in the canonical scriptures, but the main point is that even if the story is not true, how would man that lived just 2,500 years ago have such a story at all? There shouldn't be any beast like this that's so revered and feared and such, um, you know, godlike beast that people would even worship it. I mean, we all seen lions and tigers and bears and all that sort of thing out in the forest. And in our modern man, that's all we know about. But yet they think this animal is so great that it's worthy to be worshipped. And why would that legend or that story even be a part of our history here, or even a thought in anybody's mind if they had really all died out millions of years ago? So specifically in Scripture, we can read in Job chapter 40, just a snippet there. It says, Behold now Behemoth, which I made with thee, he moveth his tail like a cedar. Of course, we know that on day six, God created man and land animals. So this behemoth was created not 65 million years ago or millions of years ago, pre-man or something like that. He was there with mankind from a biblical standpoint and a science standpoint as well. Job 41 says, Can you pull in Leviathan with a hook? Who can penetrate his coat of armor? None is so fierce that dare stir him. Its back has rows of shields, flames stream from its mouth, smoke pours from its nostrils. Yeah, that's a pretty good description of a fire-breathing dragon. And if you remember, in a few classes ago, we talked about the bombardier beetle. That's the beetle that had two pouches in its abdomen there that could mix chemicals together that would then explode out and actually burn its predator that was trying to hurt it. So it's not unheard of for an animal to have some kind of fiery chemical type of components to it. So maybe that's what this animal had too, that he could actually breathe some kind of burning gas or liquid out of its mouth. It's kind of sad to say too about commentaries on this. A lot of times it's in the Bible, in the subsection of the commentaries about when it tries to describe these animals. And it'll try to relate these to modern day animals like a hippopotamus or a crocodile. But notice the scripture says he moveth his tail like a cedar. So God's trying to give us no unclear answer that this animal is something that's not something that we would see even today. If you ever seen the tail of a hippopotamus, I mean, it's a very small, little squiggly little tail that may be a foot long or something. Certainly doesn't sway like a cedar. And even a crocodile, I mean, that doesn't really make much sense either. We've seen like Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter. He was a mere man, and yet he played with crocodiles. So I don't think that's what God had in mind when he had Job write these verses down. This is an animal that we don't see today, but was certainly around when mankind was there. So let's look at some of these other scriptures that reveal dragon type information. A lot of what we can glean from dragons through these scriptures. It says, Thou shalt tread upon the lion and adder, the young lion and the dragon shalt thou trample under feet. So this language uses the most fierce known animals to show that we will triumph no matter what comes against us. Of course, this is written by David and shows that, he's comparing a lion and an adder, which is a very poisonous snake there, and a dragon all together, these very fierce animals. And he puts dragon as part of that list of very fierce animals and shows how we can conquer anything once we have God on our side. Isaiah 27, it says, In that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. So it sounds like the same type of dragon in Job. Appears to equate Leviathan with the dragon. So again, this looks like an ocean-going dinosaur that both Job and Isaiah are mentioning. And remember, this is a long time later. Job was written probably around 2000 BC. Isaiah is around 750 BC. So this is most likely, easily over 1,000 years later that they're still talking about dragons and this Leviathan. Jeremiah 51, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, hath devoured me. He hath crushed me. He hath made me an empty vessel. He hath swallowed me up like a dragon. He hath filled his belly with my delicates. He hath cast me out. It's kind of a funny term there. He says he hath filled me his belly with my delicates. I'm not sure what my delicates are, but I certainly wouldn't want it swallowed by a dragon. But interesting that it talks about an animal that's big enough to swallow a whole person. So that's not any kind of animal we have today. There's no animal big enough to do that and all in one gulp. But it seems like these dragons that it's mentioning absolutely were big enough to do that. In Micah 1:8, it says, Therefore I will wail and howl, I will go stripped and naked. I will make a wailing like the dragons and mourning as the owls. So apparently dragons make this loud wailing sound. That word wailing means to mourn or a lamentation. So you can imagine as big as an animal like a dragon or a dinosaur would be, you would think there would be a very guttural type, low sound that they would make just because of their size. And it sounds exactly like what the scripture's saying here, some kind of wailing, moaning type sound that they made. Isaiah 35, it says, "And the parched ground shall become a pool, and the thirsty land springs of water in the habitation of dragons, where each lay and shall be in grass with reeds and rushen." So dragons apparently like to rest and lie down in marshes. They hid among the grass and the reeds. In Jeremiah 14, "And the wild donkeys did stand in the high places. They snuffed up the wind like dragons. Their eyes did fail because there was no grass." So again, it seems like dragons had a deep breath that could be heard. That word snuffed means to breathe heavily. So you could imagine an animal that size, you could hear their very heavy breathing. And if you've ever heard the breathing of a donkey, as it mentions, they can bray pretty loudly and definitely have a lot of wind in their lungs to be able to make those sounds. And that's just a small little donkey. Or imagine a big dinosaur like creature that could be making similar sounds. Ezekiel 29, it says, "The great dragon that lieth in the midst of his rivers, which has said, My river is mine own, and I have made it for myself." So a dragon is big enough to lie down on its belly in the middle of a river. And that word lieth means to lie down stretched out. So he can lay down in a river and be fine. So that shows it's a very big animal. That's not something, so no animal we know today could lie down in the middle of a river and be safe and be fine, or would even want to do that. So very definitely a big animal. Jeremiah 49, "And Hazor shall be a dwelling place for dragons, and a desolation forever. There shall no man abide there, nor any son of man dwell in it." So it looks like dragons lived in very lonely and desolate places. They probably wanted to stay away from man. After the flood and these dinosaurs that came off the ark, probably would have wanted to get away as much as possible. You can imagine, the fear of man was put into animals after the flood, and so all animals scattered once that happened. But once the time came and man was hungry enough to search out food from these animals, the dinosaurs would have been big enough to feed whole villages, most likely. So there would be definitely probably a sought after for food at some point. And that may be why that they look for lonely and desolate places, because they're trying to escape any semblance of man's civilization. So we see this summary description of dragons or dinosaurs. As they said, tail like a cedar tree, no creature like that today. Fierce creature, coat of armor, flames from its mouth and smoke from its nostrils, similar to that bombardier beetle capability that we looked at earlier. Big enough to swallow a man whole. They made loud, wailing noises. Lived near marshes, linked or like to be hidden in the grass and reeds. Deep breathing that could be heard. Could lie down in the middle of a river. Lived in lonely and desolate places. And that sounds very much like what we know about dinosaurs just from paleontology. So how could the Bible know such things if these creatures died out 65 million years ago? Remember again, Job, even though it was written, probably 4,000 years ago, but if dinosaurs really died out 65 million years ago, that was way before any kind of man, from an evolutionary standpoint, would have even been on the scene to know that dinosaurs were around and what they looked like and what they sounded like. And yet we see all these very descriptive things of these animals that apparently were around when Job was around and other prophets were around, and was common knowledge for a lot of people. As we'll see going forward, that we're going to see there's a lot more evidence than even this. So the word dinosaur didn't come into use until 1842, when British scientist Richard Owen coined the term. What did humans call these terrible reptiles before then? You guessed it, dragons. Our ancestors documented dragon sightings in different ways all over the world for millennia. Legends of dragons like creatures have been found from the Americas to Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Here's an interesting Egyptian artifact called the Narmer palette. It shows handlers subduing two dinosaur-like creatures. The animals have on the plaque have legs that extend straight down from their bodies and serpentine necks. Those are two features found in sauropods. And there's a similar uh, pictograph of that in a seal from the ancient Mesopotamian Uruk civilization that reveals these another sauropod-like creature in a fighting posture. Apparently maybe they didn't have their legs weren't maybe that accustomed to doing nothing but walking really. But so maybe they fought with their necks. Their necks were very long. Maybe they tried to strangle each other using their necks. I mean, who knows what was really going on there? But apparently that was a scene that somebody saw and carved into these seals and these different palettes. So very interesting artwork there. There's many thousands of ceramic figurines that have been excavated from graves predating all known cultures. Many of the figurines are apparently of dinosaur-like creatures portrayed in living postures. You can see that clay figurine in the Mexico area, and that was around 800 BC to 200 AD, so not really all that long ago. Rock pictograph, very similar to a brontosaurus. So if modern man didn't reconstruct dinosaurs until the 1800s, and if they really died out 65 million years ago, mankind that lived hundreds or even thousands of years ago should not even know what dinosaurs look like. And yet we see these figurines and pictographs all over the place. Petroglyphs in the Native American out west. You can see the one there in Grand Canyon that was discovered in 1879. American Indians have had many legends of fearsome creatures such as the Thunderbird, which sounds very much like a pterodactyl. But they also left numerous rock pictographs indicating they had real interactions with him, both flying and walking. And we see these drawings in Utah, Arizona, Colorado, and elsewhere that are all documented. We can go to Cambodia. There's a monastery there in the middle of the jungle. It was built around 1100 AD and includes carvings of numerous creatures on its ornate walls, creatures that evidently lived nearby. It also includes an explicitly clear carving of what looks like a stegosaur. So Cambodians carved this image nearly 800 years before scientists even discovered stegosaur fossils. And there you can see in that picture at the bottom a modern day representation of a stegosaur. These Incan burial stones, these are probably my favorite evidences for young Earth. These are stones that are put in grave sites for people that usually depict something major that happened in their life. And a lot of times, in this case, the poor fellow there is being attacked by these two creatures. And these stones only date back to 500 to 1500 AD. And it looks like he's fighting off two allosaurs. And you can see in the upper left there what a reconstructed image of what an allosaur probably looked like. And it looks very similar to what's being portrayed on this Incan burial stone. So again, very much resembles an allosaur. And you might could say, well, these creatures are, maybe that's really a bear and just kind of a bad artistry, or maybe it's just the imagination or whatever of somebody. But the second one is probably the most in just very much provides evidence there for the young Earth and dinosaurs living with man with a triceratops. I mean, there's no creature, you can't mistake that for a lion or a bear or anything like that. But you actually see this triceratops with a man riding on him with a blanket of some kind or almost a saddle. And he seems to be so relaxed, he's even smoking a pipe while he's riding this triceratops. So how in the world could there be an artwork like this? That there's no way that could be just an imagination. That is a very specific drawing of an animal that somebody saw and depicted on this Incan burial stone. And again, this burial stone's only 500 to 1500 AD, so not really all that long ago. Could be only 500 or 600 years ago. So very, very interesting evidence of man and dinosaurs living together. And that's just an unmistakable likeness of a triceratops. So it appears that man and dinosaurs have always lived together. No matter where you go in time and history, historical evidences, there's evidence of people talking about these dragons or dinosaurs. Encounters with dragons from all over the globe. Marco Polo mentioned one in China around 1300 AD, Alexander the Great in 325 BC, St. George in England around 300 AD. And then here's another, probably the most modern example, is in 1890, the Tombstone Epitaph. These two ranchers found what appears to be a pterodactyl there in the desert. Just to read a couple excerpts from this little article here. It says a winged monster resembling a huge alligator with an extremely elongated tail and an immense pair of wings was found on the desert between Whetstone and Huachuca Mountains last Sunday by two ranchers who were returning home from the Huachucas. It says they had some difficulty in measuring the wings as they were partly folded under the body, but finally got one straightened out sufficiently to get a measurement of 78 feet, making the total length from tip to tip about 160 feet. The wings were composed of a thick, nearly transparent membrane and were devoid of feathers or hair, as was the entire body. So it just shows that there must have been something these guys found. It's just a shame that they couldn't have preserved this animal, but apparently it was kind of on its last leg, and they were able to subdue it pretty easily. But that was, as you can see, 1890, so only just a little over 100 years ago. These two paleontologists, Mary Schweitzer and John Horner, were premier scientists in their day, and I think they're still working. But Mary Schweitzer was a paleontologist at North Carolina State University who led the groups that discovered the remains of blood cells in dinosaur fossils. In 1993, she discovered soft tissue remains in the Tyrannosaurus rex specimen in Mawar 1125, as well as evidence that the specimen was even a pregnant female when it died. And I remember reading this article. They're not creationists by any means. They're just standard evolutionary paleontologists. And so she really struggled when she found this evidence. It's like, how can I say this? The people are going to, ostracize me and think I'm crazy. But the evidence was there. And to her credit, she allowed this evidence to go forward. And really it was a boon to creationism. And since 1993, evidence of soft tissues and numerous fossils has continued. They've even found DNA, proteins, remnant cells, organelle-like structures, which are the internal components of a cell, nucleus, etc. Blood-derived proteins have also been discovered, and even mosquito fossils. And kind of a strange quirk of irony, the movie Jurassic Park debuted that same year in 1993, where it was portrayed that dinosaur DNA was found. But so not very well advertised a lot of times, but they're finding numerous examples of uh, dinosaur soft tissues. Matter of fact, they're even going back into the museums and getting the fossils off the shelves and testing these uh, fossils that have been on the shelves for decades and finding soft tissue within them. They may have to look pretty hard because they're buried down deep because there is some fossilization there, but they're still finding these components of soft tissue. And again, how could that be if they're really 65 million years old? There's no way there'd be any blood cells left, and certainly DNA and that kind of thing. And this is actually some pictures of that Tyrannosaurus Rex that was found by Mary Schweitzer. And you can see the various tissue types that have been found. And in that G nomenclature there for that little inset picture, you can see an intact blood cell there, and in some of the other pictures as well. Well, that shows that this couldn't have been frozen. Some people might think, well, this animal died and then apparently got frozen very quickly and all that sort of thing. And that's how it got preserved. But that can't be, because what happens when you freeze something? Well, it forms icicles, and these icicles puncture cell membranes. And so, sure, you could freeze something, but as soon as you unthaw it, it just becomes a bloody mess because all the cells have been destroyed through the icicle-like formations within them. So there's no way this thing had been frozen yet, and it was found in the Hells Creek Formation in Montana. So most likely it was buried underground and had never been frozen, it ever got cold enough underneath the ground where it had been buried. But to have these soft tissues that are still there shows that it just could not be that old. Certainly could not be 65 million years old. And there's many, many examples. This isn't just one out of a million chance or something like that that this survived, or just maybe just one animal that survived for or a group of animals or something like that. These are being found all over the world with these soft tissues and evidence of a young age. Fossil found in Poland that was supposedly 247 million years old contained collagen and blood vessels. Of course, collagen, is the part of on our body would be like for our hair and our nails and that kind of thing. But the reason they say 247 million years old is because they say it was found in a rock layer that they dated to be 247 years old, 247 million years old. And there's no way that you can make those stipulations and still see blood vessels and collagen that still has survived. So it shows even the dating of these rocks is definitely inaccurate. And we saw that in the last class where we looked at radiometric dating and how all the bad assumptions really kind of create wrong estimates of these ages. A bird fossil in Germany dated to 48 million years still contains a yellow oil from the preening gland. A turtle fossil found in Denmark dated at 54 million years still contains skin pigmentation. Also, the fossil appears identical to today's sea turtles with no evolutionary processes in sight. I'd say that's another great point is that the animal looks exactly the same as it does today. And so if there was really evolution going on, why wouldn't there be at least some small difference? But there's not. They're all the exact same animal. This was a article I've got off Yahoo not too long ago, and the headline was one of the most beautiful and best preserved dinosaur specimens. This nodosaur, and you can see a picture of it there in the upper right-hand corner. With on the left is the kind of a graphic artist version of it, but you can see it was a very well preserved fossil there. And it was just discovered by accident by a heavy machine operator digging through oil sands in Alberta, Canada, there in 2011. It's so well preserved, it looks like a statue and was preserved inside its scaly skin. Researchers were able to use mass spectrometry to detect pigments in this dinosaur skin, which is lighter on its underside and darker reddish brown above. So, very clear indication of either casting or petrification. I'm not sure which, but definitely a very clear picture of what these little nodosaurs look like. And one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to look at the comment section to see what people thought about this. And it's really kind of maybe surprising, but not too surprising in some ways. Comment one, it says, "Is it less than 6,000 years old? If not, it's not real and is here to test our faith." At least that's what I've been told by evangelical goofballs. So, why is there so much animosity about a belief that dinosaurs and mankind live together? Why can't there just be, okay, if you want to believe that, that's fine, and I'll believe what I want to believe, and that's fine too. But why is there so much animosity? Well, I think the answer is that Satan doesn't want us to know what the truth is. He wants to pervert God's creation. He wants to put a wedge between what God's word says and what people understand. And so there's this natural animosity that's implanted in people and this is one of those areas. Comment number two says, "I came to the comments to see if there is any idiots claiming that dinosaurs are not real." Any of you religious nuts have a comment today? Now, comment number three, "The earth is flat though, right?" So the premise is by all three of these people that somehow they think Christians are just stupid and don't have enough understanding to realize that dinosaurs are real, or we think the earth is flat, or things like that. But I can tell you, as someone who is a Christian and also as someone who has advanced degrees in aerospace engineering, that I am not stupid, and I understand that dinosaurs did live and were very much a part of man's life. And these people have just not known the truth is the problem. Just like whether it's scripture or just true science, they've not understood all the evidences that I'm showing you today that shows that animals, these ancient animals, and mankind lived together. And then comment four is actually almost the more disturbing one because it supposedly is written by a Christian. It says, "I am a committed Christian and I do believe God created everything, but the Bible was written by men, although inspired by God. These men who had no concept of the working of nature but put down their best guess as to explain the unexplainable. I revel in science, but I never forget who created it all. I also have a very little respect for persons who blindly follow a narrow view of God. There's a recreated ark on display that has dinosaurs in the cages. Come on, people, don't yield all logic at the church door." Well, that sounds good on the surface, and I'm sure that there are people, even Christians, that maybe have a similar thought, but that's not very scriptural at all. The Bible is very clear that man and animals were made at the same time, that there's no reason to believe that there's millions of years between when dinosaurs lived and when mankind lived, and there's tons of evidence that show these animals lived not that long ago. So it just really shows a lack of faith on their part in God's word. Here's an imprint of a dragonfly fossil, 2.5 feet in wingspan. Secular scientists theorize that millions of years ago, vast lowland swamps produce an oxygen-rich atmosphere that may have had even 50% more oxygen than present day. And this rich oxygen atmosphere may have caused the dragonfly and other insects to grow larger in size to avoid oxygen toxicity. Now, I certainly agree the atmosphere was different. I don't agree with the millions of years, but pre-flood, remember there was this canopy of water that was around the earth, and uh, and it seems like the atmosphere must have been different. Matter of fact, they say that probably this dragonfly couldn't even fly in our current atmosphere. It just couldn't generate enough lift with its wings. So very different atmosphere, and maybe that's why people and animals live longer, potentially. Maybe that was a reason for the pre-flood humans that we've talked about in Genesis chapter 5, that lists the age of some of the patriarchs that are living hundreds of years. Maybe that's part of the reason they had a lot more oxygen and shielded from the gamma radiation, solar radiation, that kind of thing. We don't know for sure, but it was definitely a different atmosphere back then. There's many of these dinosaur superhighways that have been discovered as well. These are places usually on strips of narrow, high ground where a multitude of tracks from many different types of dinosaurs are located. And these tracks include bird-sized theropods, the pterosaur, the large sauropods, and nodosaur prints. These are all over the American West, Alaska, Maryland, are several such places. These superhighways have been discovered, and there were surprising discoveries to secular scientists because they did not expect such animal diversity in such close proximity and short time window. They see these preserved footprints and they see all these small animals, the predators as well as the ones that they would normally would sought after to eat are all mixing their footprints together. And most likely what happened was during the flood, these bigger, stronger animals were able to get out of the way of some of the initial floodwaters and try to climb to higher ground, and or at least land bridges or something like that through the water. And of course, they eventually were destroyed. But during this time, they all just panicked and walked together, or ran together, scattered across these land bridges. And they weren't interested in eating each other at the time. They were just trying to escape these floodwaters. So these panicked animals congregated together, and I think that's what we see in these superhighways. Here's a latest track that they just found in actually 2025, earlier this year in Oxfordshire, England. The longest trackway is estimated to be 492 feet in length, and it's probably longer. And you can see their tracks there. But think about this: if these animals really lived 65 million years ago, well, how could these footprints still be around? I mean, there's tons of erosion. Um, you'd have earthquake and tectonic activity. There just wouldn't be any evidence of this casting of their footprints in the mud like this. Um, they would have just been eroded by many millions of years worth of tsunamis, bitter cold, hail, climate change patterns, ice ages, tornadoes, flooding, all that kind of thing would have destroyed and eroded away these small little footprints. And you see these footprints all over the world. So it just doesn't make sense that it could be that old. So secular evolutionists, their time scale, of the fossil layer, is much larger than the creationists. Obviously, over 500 million years. Um, Also, the evolutionists will say that you see life evolving from very simple to complex life as you go up in the layers. I remember when we talked a couple classes ago about the trilobite that's supposedly at the Cambrian layer when they first see it, and that's supposedly 570 million years ago. Well, they have the most complex set of eyes of almost any creature that's ever lived, and yet it's at the bottom of the fossil layer. How could that be? They didn't evolve, and then trilobites that are seen in the upper layers, like the Cretaceous layer and things like that, they're all the same. They still have these same features, same eyes. There is no evolutionary transition. And so it's obvious that from a creationist standpoint, these animals were all buried very quickly. The animals like the trilobites and the other smaller animals were buried very quickly because they couldn't move or even have the intelligence to get out of the way of a major flood. And the stronger, bigger animals saw some avenues of escape, like the land bridges and things like that, and maybe they lasted a little bit longer in the flood. Remember, the flood was around a year long process. And so some of these animals were able to escape for a little while. And so they were buried at the very last. And remember, we also talked about at the very top layer, that's the only place you ever see any evidence of rivers and streams. You'd think if this really took millions of years, then you'd see streams in the Cambrian layer and the Permian layer and the Cretaceous layer. You'd see evidence of streams and rivers in those fossil layers, and yet you don't. You only see those in the very top layer of today. So this worldwide flood, really can see in the fossil layer, it looks the way it does. And of course, if you have an evolutionary viewpoint, then you have a viewpoint that it was hundreds of millions of years old. But from a creationist standpoint and acknowledging the flood of Noah and that flood took only about a year to transpire, and you realize that it's very quick and it happened only a few thousand years ago. They also have what's called biochemistry reports. These are official scientific reports that record evidence of soft organic tissue within recovered fossils. And they look at the layers of the fossil record and look for these tissues, and they found them all the way down to the very bottom. Um, it's all at all levels of sediment, um, and even at the very oldest, supposedly 2 billion years old in the fossil record. And this reveals further evidence of a world that was destroyed by a worldwide flood. If lower sediment levels represented hundreds of millions of years ago, then there should be no organic tissue in fossils at these levels. There's also something called living fossils that certainly do not support evolution. There's an animal called the coelacanth. It was once considered a missing link between fish and amphibians. Its fins there that you see on the kind of the bottom underneath the fish there, they were considered to be beginning of appendages to help it walk on land. I mean, that was in the textbooks that they saw. See, here's an example of evolution in process. And that it was found in rocks that were dated at 400 million years ago. Well, a coelacanth was actually caught by a Madagascar fishing vessel in 1938, and they've seen many since then. And it shows these coelacanths actually swimming, not walking. They were using those fins that they thought were appendages to swim. They weren't used for walking. So the coelacanths of today are the exact same as those in the fossil record. So we see a lot of times this is just imaginations and wishful thinking of evolutionists trying to fit their theories into the fossil record, and by trying to say that those were legs being evolution generated, and of course it was totally false. So here's some of the news headlines. This isn't just one or two every now and then. They're really kind of a lot of these headlines. They're just buried in the back of the news and not really shown very often. Uh, Green River Formation fossils have original soft tissue. Remarkably preserved shrimp is 350 million years old, question mark. The giant penguin feathers poses problems for long ages. 80 million year old mosasaur fossil has soft retina and blood residue. Um, Intact DNA discovered in ancient salt deposits. Uh, Fresh salamander tissues found in solid rock. Even a 45 million year old brewer's yeast that still works. Mummified dinosaur skin that looks young. The hadrosaur soft tissues, another blow to long ages. So a lot of these articles are occurring, but just like I said, they're just not really widely shown in the news articles. And scientists are now re-examining previous fossil finds for soft tissue. Like I said, they're going in back into the museums. And these fossils they had on the shelf for decades, they thought they were just solid rock, and they're going back in and finding these soft tissues. So evidence is overwhelming that dinosaurs died out recently and that mankind shared the world with them. The so-called modern man should not even know anything about dinosaurs that went extinct 65 million years ago, and yet they depicted in legends and artwork all over the world. Job is the oldest book of the Bible, dating back about 4,000 years ago, and yet it has many references to dragons, or therefore dinosaurs. Soft organic tissue, including DNA, have been found in fossils supposedly hundreds of millions of years old. And again, there's no evidence of no evidence of evolutionary transitions are seen in the fossil record. There's no, hopeful monster, as the evolutionists would call it. That's their own term that they used for their hope of finding this transitional creature of species to species. And yet, overall, the whole fossil record, they can't find any. There should be many, many examples of that. There should be even examples of these transitional creatures running around in our as alive today, if it was really true. But it's not. They can't find anything. All the animals they find today, they look back in the fossil record, and they're the exact same animal, even going back into hundreds of millions of years ago, supposedly rocks. So there's just no evidence whatsoever that evolution is true through the fossil record. Well, that concludes the paleontology section. Next week, we'll be looking at biology and also something called nature clocks. Now, biology is probably one of the most best areas of science that support a young creation because as we'll see, mutation rates and DNA and all that very much support that there was a designer. There's just no way that this information that's in DNA would support something that's just random chance. So we'll look at that in detail and look forward to seeing you guys back then. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you next week.